Hello, Barry. It is a bit of uncharted territory here, if I'm honest. Blood is pumping a little bit crazy. We are live on the interwebs for the first time ever. It's quite a bit of adrenaline that's just rushing through my blood. But basically, the reason we're doing this is to try and get some efficiencies in our workflow, not to sound so technical. But obviously, it takes ages to edit episodes. I mean, we're currently on episode 62, and we're busy recording 63 before we've even released 62 because it takes so long. It's Barry uploading the video on his side, me actually editing it. By the time it gets to you guys, it's a little bit old already. So Barry, how are you doing? Are you excited to be doing our very first live stream?
I'm very excited. It's taken us over an hour to figure out all the technical nits and bits and pieces, trying to get the microphones and the cameras to work. So this really is uncharted territory, like you say. And we're going to test this out on this episode. So bear with us throughout all the technical glitches that are to come over the next hour or so. But I'm very excited, Chad. I think that this live format's going to bring a whole new energy to the podcast. And I can't wait to get started.
I completely agree. I think it's, we spoke in episode 62, which a lot of people haven't even heard yet about, Clubhouse and what it's doing to just this idea of live. And I do think it's a very exciting space. So I'm glad we're getting involved in it ourselves too. So if you're new here, welcome to Across the Pond. You're obviously going to be seeing this recorded afterwards as well. And the other thing it's going to let us do, Barry, is actually interact with guests too, because now what we have is the comments and reactions feature. While people are watching, they can actually engage with us too, which is really cool.
Definitely. And hopefully it brings more people into the show on a real-time basis, which is really exciting. So yeah, it's one of those things where if you love Across the Pond and you really want to get into the meat of things as it comes out, you have a great opportunity to interact and ask questions and give your thoughts. Because of course, we don't know everything. There's a lot of stuff we don't know about, and we'd love to have some other voices in the podcast as well. So hopefully that is the case as we go forward with this, Chad.
Too true. Well, shall we kick this one off then? I know we've got some pretty technical stuff to explain this week. Hopefully we don't make as many mistakes as we do usually, but that's okay. I'm sure people will be okay with us. It is our first live stream after all. So shall we kick off with the week that was?
Let's do it, Chad.
The week that was.
It has been a crazy week in the financial markets, Chad.
Yep.
One of the most insane weeks I can ever remember when it comes to Wall Street and the stock markets. And it's been weird because it's been not just the financially savvy people who've been talking about it. It's literally been everywhere. Every single news site, everyone is talking about this whole thing, this thing called GameStop.
Yep.
This old gaming retailer in the US that was kind of irrelevant, was kind of going out of business. It felt like it didn't really exist anymore. And all of a sudden its share price has rocketed up thanks to a battle between Reddit and the hedge funds, Chad. Have you followed any of this?
So to be completely honest, I for some reason was living in a bit of underneath a rock at the beginning part of this week. And one of my colleagues actually reached out and said, have you heard about GameStop? Have you been following what's actually been happening? And just a very quick Google search revealed all that was. And I mean, you're completely right. It felt to me like we were back in the early crypto days where everyone and their horse is throwing their personal money into a commodity. In this case, we're talking about a share of a company that is listed. But you're completely right. A company that, for all intensive purposes, is just a gaming brick and mortar store. But obviously, we've got a lot more to talk about here, Barry. We've got the whole phenomenon of social media and how that is affecting what is currently happening. And then, of course, you've got the backdrop of COVID-19, people having a lot more time on their hands. You've got all of the various stimulus measures that's been thrown out throughout the world. People are on furlough, sitting at home with they're not actually having to work for their money. So there's loads of different variables here, and I'm certainly keen to get your take, being someone who worked in a bank and basically did all of your rotations through all the various departments. So I'm keen to hear it from your angle.
Yes, like you say, it's almost the perfect storm. All these things came together to create this absolutely insane scenario. And so, what I thought we'd do is run through it step by step and see if we can break down some of the key principles. And it's good that you almost haven't been following, Chad, because you can ask the questions that our listeners would
Yeah.
normally ask if they don't know what's going on. So let's get started, right? So back in June 2019, there was this Reddit user called Real Fucking Value who was buying what they call long dated calls on GameStop stock back in the day. And what a call means is basically you're betting for the share to go up.
Yep.
So he believed that for some reason, this company was going to turn itself around and reinvent itself. And had bought $50,000 worth of calls. And on this Reddit forum every single month, he was posting a screenshot of his balance under the title GME YOLO Update. And basically, people were laughing at him for months and months and months as his position went down and down and down.
Oh,
I think it was
gosh.
down up to $40,000 at one point. So that was the first piece of it, right? Second piece, Michael Burry, an investor that was famous because he was one of the guys in The Big Short. He shorted the mortgage crisis in 2008.
Right.
He disclosed a 3% position in GameStop back in August 2019, basically saying that he thinks this company is very, very undervalued. So that was the second piece of this. The third piece is that GameStop itself in August 2020, so a year later, installed an e-commerce expert by the name of Ryan Cohen into their board. So that he took a 10% position, and his whole plan was to try and turn this retailer into an online gaming sales platform, for
Okay.
example. And so those are the three pieces that kind of gave you a sense that maybe there was more to this $3-4 stock than meets the eye. And because of that, those stocks jumped, I think, up until about $20 or $30 at that stage. So it really showed a little bit of that. What happened on the other side, though, is that the hedge funds and the institutional capital didn't believe that they were going to be able to turn this around. And they saw this as an opportunity to short these shares. Now,
Right.
to short these shares, what that means is that we're going to bet for it to go down. We think the share price is going to go down. And so when you short a share, all you're doing is you're borrowing a share from somebody else,
Yep.
then you're selling it at market value, and then hoping to buy it back at a later date at a lower value in order to give it back to the person you borrowed it from.
Right.
So it's a little bit complicated from a financial perspective, but basically all you're doing is you're betting for the company's share price to go down. So the Reddit subreddit called Wall Street Bets discovered that there were huge numbers of shorts on this GameStop stock. There we go. In fact, it was 120% more shorts than there were shares in existence,
Wow.
which is a crazy stat. It can't work like that. It doesn't make any sense that that's possible, right? And so Wall Street Bets decided they were going to teach these hedge fund guys a lesson. And they didn't like the fact that these hedge funds were trying to destroy the stock by just shorting the crap out of it, right?
Yep.
And so what they decided with their millions and millions of people on this subreddit is that they were going to go and buy the stock all at the same time and see if they could drive the price up and up and up and up and up to force these hedge funds to like consolidate all of their losses in order to cover what's called a margin call.
Right.
So when you post a short, you have to have some money in your bank account so that if things go haywire, you can actually pay back the person you borrowed the
Yep.
share from. So if you can force that margin call, it's something called a short squeeze. And basically, you've got no other option than to buy back the share at a loss. In essence, pushing that price even further as you buy it, and then giving that share back to the person you borrowed it from. So there was this little glitch in the matrix, and these little Redditors decided, cool, let's see what we can do. Can we push the share price up to the moon, as they've been saying, GameStop to the moon, right? And by doing so, they caused an absolute chaos in the markets, because all of a sudden these hedge funds were finding themselves losing billions and billions of dollars every single minute, and it caused an absolute war that is still raging today, Chad.
Yeah, it's just insane. And I think you've given the most perfect explanation in terms of the financial sense for the kind of ordinary man on the street to understand. I think a lot of people, though, have become a bit more financially literate after the story, because in kind of understanding what this whole like swarm and this whole media storm has been, you have to go and watch a bit of a basic 101 video to try and understand it. But you're right, it's just been absolutely crazy to see like you say, firstly that short level, and then secondly the squeeze, which was highly effective, and like we're saying, loads of little things to talk about. So the first bit that I want to quickly just ask about, obviously assuming you didn't have anything more to add there, and if you did, we can go back to it later. But I just want to touch on something that you pointed there, which is kind of this idea about that 120% short interest driving the stock down, like not just the kind of financial value of the stock down, but when we see big shorts like this, it starts to really investors start to have questions about what about the underlyings in the stock. Are there investigations that need to be had? Is there information that the rest of the market don't know about? Why do these hedge funds think they're worth so little? So in the past, I think lots of shorts have resulted in like you say, just market sentiment completely changing on a stock. And obviously the guys on Reddit here just had this idea of the big man and the little guy fighting back.
Yeah, definitely. And that's such a key point, because all of this is market sentiment, right? The price that GameStop is at the moment, which is over $300 and something a share, is not indicative at all of the business. It is pure speculation. It's a pure war on this price, trying to squeeze these guys for as much as they can. I think what's very important about this is that you should never get to a stage where your shorts exceed the number of shares, right? The only reason that gets to that stage is because you've got thousands of different brokers that can all offer this financial instrument, and they don't care about the company at all. It's not like they've seen some fraud. It's not like they've seen anything. They're just making a bet. And so a lot of this is financial gambling. And unfortunately, that doesn't help the company itself, because, like you say, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The moment that a layman sees a short like that, they assume that these hedge funds must know something that they don't. And then in order to kind of make it work, they will bet that they'll push that stock down because they will want to sell it. And so the conversation around here is that, should that be legal? Is that the system working the way it should, or should we need to change things in order to avoid that happening? And then again, why should a hedge fund have the power to destroy a company based solely on their financial gambling? That's kind of a big question that's come out of this, is that it's not like they have seen, they don't have a reason to bet this company down other than they think that it's not worth what it's worth. And so shorting is important in one sense because it keeps investors accountable and it keeps businesses accountable and kind of regulates prices in the market. But when it gets to this sort of level, when you're shorting way more than the shares that are available, something's broken there. And that's why that's where this conversation of Bitcoin and decentralized finance comes from, is that in a Bitcoin or blockchain environment, you wouldn't be able to short more shares than there exists, because there's one source of truth. There's one public ledger. But in our current system, that's not the case. And so you end up with these weird scenarios we've seen over the last week.
Yeah, and I think talking about the regulation is the next point to discuss on, because obviously you're very familiar with certainly in the South African landscape what all that regulation looks like, and I know it's very different depending on where you are in the world, but certainly this idea of a whole bunch of people together kind of colluding to buy a certain stock doesn't seem at first glance to me to be something that is legal. And I actually watched a very interesting interview earlier by Sky with essentially the guy who was the original Wolf of Wall Street, and kind of his take on it. And it's pretty fascinating. I mean, he pretty much said, had he actually got involved in this kind of thing, he probably would have been taken out for it. And I mean, there's the question: is this, strictly speaking, legal? A forum of individuals collectively going together, colluding to invest in a particular stock?
It's the most interesting piece of this, because it kind of, we don't know if it's market manipulation or not. Basically, the legal thing they're talking about is this market manipulation? Are you kind of colluding, like you say, to drive a stock up or down without reference to the actual fundamentals? And in one sense it is. In one sense it is, because you got this ginormous subreddit saying, cool, we don't care what GameStop's about. We're just going to buy it nonetheless because we know we can squeeze these guys out. So in that sense, it is manipulation. But then on the other side of the coin, hedge funds have been doing this since the beginning of time. Everyone knows that in the informal conversations and the servers and the WhatsApp groups and all the stuff between big hedge fund investors, they've been doing this forever. That's how they make their money, is that they move sentiment and they move markets because they've got billions and billions of dollars to deploy. So the question is it wrong now that the little guys are doing it, even though the big guys have been doing it for so long? And that is the big question here, is like, where should this regulation lie, and what difference does it make whether it's on a subreddit or in a WhatsApp group between hedge fund managers, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a completely fair question. And I mean, like you say, a lot of people are asking that question, which is weird because the way you phrase it, being it's been happening for so long under different guise, and it's okay in that vein. But now we're starting to question things. Now, the one thing
It's
that,
just more public, right? It's just more
yeah,
public. That's what it is, and that's what the social media thing does. Is that it's in the eye of everybody. The hedge fund stuff, all of their manipulation happens behind closed doors,
yeah,
and the vast majority of people don't know about it. But when it's on a subreddit that everyone can look at and the whole world is watching, it changes everything.
yeah, it completely does. So the one thing about the little guy and how the little guy was actually able to even do this, considering, of course, basically the technology of today, and I suppose all the platforms that we have at our hands, is that the little guy can now actually download an app. I mean, in the crypto world, you would refer to it as an on-ramp and an off-ramp. I suppose it works fairly similar in the share trading environment, but essentially, these investors, the little guy, have been able to easily, buy and sell shares in a way that they haven't in previous decades. And obviously, they were quite frustrated when one of those exchanges decided to actually block the sale of these securities, potentially to safeguard themselves. I don't know. What do you think?
That's the big drama of the last couple of days. And Chad, it wasn't just so the app you're referring to is Robinhood, and that's
Yeah,
kind of the biggest one that's kind of democratized investing. But there's actually 5 or 6 different companies who did the same thing. It's just the Robinhood in the news because they're the best known one.
right.
And like you say, they brought the kind of investing to individual investors that just wasn't possible beforehand. Not just to buy shares, to buy calls, to buy puts, to buy all these complicated financial instruments
Yeah,
that weren't part of individual investing for the longest time. And so Robinhood got incredibly popular. They became the number one app in the App Store. They
wow.
were absolutely gathering all of these people who were jumping on this bandwagon, GME to the moon. Everyone was shouting the rallying cry. And Robinhood just couldn't handle it, right? And so what happened was very abruptly, they kind of announced that, listen, we're pausing trading on a few shares, including GameStop, and you wouldn't be able to buy shares. You could still sell your shares if you wanted to, but you couldn't buy any more shares. And the reason that they gave, and the kind of the interviews they gave on TV, was saying that the reason was there was so much volatility that they wanted to protect the investors from themselves.
Right.
And that's it's simply not a good enough reason, to be honest.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were speculating behind the scenes as to what actually happened. And there were a couple of conspiracy theories and a couple of theories that came out. The first one is that there's a company called Citadel, which they use to do
Yeah.
what they call their share clearing. So Robinhood actually doesn't do any of the trades. All it's doing is acting as a user interface to then work with a broker behind the scenes. And that was Citadel. And there were rumors that because Citadel were involved with the hedge funds that had lost money, that they had given a call to the Robinhood
Right.
guys and said, listen, stop this now because we are losing billions and billions of dollars and we need
Yeah.
to reset our positions. If that's the case, that's illegal and that's serious ramifications. So there's lots of lawsuits that are in the offing because of that. But we don't know if that's true. The other potentially, and I think it's the more feasible one, is that Robinhood simply didn't have the liquidity to deal with all of these
Yeah.
trades.
Yeah.
When you are a financial service provider, you have to hold what's called collateral or
Yep.
capital in reserve to be able to manage all of the trades on your platform. And when you've got all of a sudden millions of people downloading the app and trying to buy stock, you've got a huge liquidity squeeze
Yep.
and crisis, right?
Yep.
And so what I really think happened was that they found themselves insolvent in overnight, like almost immediately, and had to try and find a way to find extra capital, find an injection to be able to meet the regulatory requirements. So that to me is more feasible. But even so, they didn't say that. Like, if that's the case, why didn't they admit that and say, listen, we are so popular, things are going so well for us, we just cannot manage all these trades. That's why we're stopping it. What it looked like, unfortunately, is that the hedge funds were stopping action in their tracks so that they could reset their positions so that they could then be okay. And that's what is getting people's grills up.
Fascinating. I'm certainly excited to hear about those investigations because, I mean, I know, when we're talking about the SEC, these kinds of things are not to be taken lightly, especially if the conspiracy that you referred to in the beginning turns out to be true. And I mean, there, of course, is a possibility that that is the case. But on the second, certainly on the second, the second scenario that you mentioned there, Barry, for us as the little guy going onto this exchange and putting some numbers into an app, you put in your credit card details, and it all seems to be seamless. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that those transactions don't settle immediately. They go through Visa or MasterCard or whatever the case is, and there is going to be a bit of a delay in that kind of settlement. So is that what you're talking about in terms of the liquidity, and also just broadly speaking, I suppose, just in terms of the rest of the cash that they have to hold, in terms of all of the various acts we've seen over the years? I mean, I can think of Basil, and I'm sure you can give me a whole bunch of others being in the banking space, Barry. I mean, am I missing a few?
You are missing a few, but it gets way too complicated to go into all of them. It's very, very nuanced. But I think the key point here is that Robinhood is acting as a broker on your behalf.
Right.
And so it has to meet whatever regulatory requirements are necessary to hold the right amount of cash in their business, so that all of a sudden, if you do start selling your shares, you want to get paid out, right? If you're Robinhood, you want to sell your GameStop shares, you want that money to be
Sure.
back in your account.
Yep.
And they cannot do that unless they have certain reserves on hand. And this is exacerbated by the fact that people were buying calls and puts, which are kind of pushing this into the future, right? Where you still have to hold a margin call today. And so it's very complicated, but the idea is that Robinhood, I don't think that Robinhood had the cash or the
Right.
reserves to manage the huge amount of trades that were coming into their platform. And so in order to keep themselves solvent, which is the number one rule of business, is keep yourself solvent, they had to pause things to try and find some extra money. I think they are back online as of the time we speak now, but those 24 hours were crucial where they were down, just because people couldn't buy into the stock and they couldn't continue the squeeze. So the price dropped 45% within a couple hours. And the hedge funds, because the hedge funds, they've got their own brokers. They don't need Robinhood. And so they were able to close out any positions they
100%.
had. They were able to buy shorts to now get on the way back down when we come back from the moon.
Yep.
They're going to be able to make money going down. And so it's just a very unfair situation where hedge funds are able to trade during those 24 hours, whereas your individual investors were locked out of the market.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I do want to touch a little bit on the puts and the calls. And I mean, as you say, it gets very technical, but I do want us to be, kind of enlightening our listener who might not be aware of this stuff, as to this world that lies, beyond just GameStop. But let's talk about that. So we typically call these derivatives, which essentially means that they derive their value from an underlying something else. So that could be, a physical commodity. We could be talking about gold. We could be talking about an actual share that is linked to an exchange. We could be talking about an exchange rate. We could be talking about, cross-currency swaps, and it does get very technical indeed. But just the ability of an individual to buy a derivative, for me, without going through an investment bank, seems insane. And I was very surprised to hear that Robinhood actually facilitates this kind of transaction for an individual who might not actually even understand what it is they're buying or selling.
And it comes through in the way they sell their product. If you go onto the Robinhood app and you're not a sophisticated investor, you don't even know what you're buying.
Yep.
Like it's so easy. Within a couple clicks, you click on a green button or a red button as you think it's going to go up, or you think it's going to go down. It really is like gambling in a sense. And a lot of these investors don't know what they're doing. And that's what all this regulation is going to be about, is that moving forward, is this actually possible, and should we be allowing this? This is exactly the same sort of reckless behavior that caused the mortgage crisis of 2008.
Yeah, exactly.
Where people were able to gamble on housing prices, assuming housing always goes up. It always goes up. And all of a sudden it didn't go up. And everyone was like, oh, wait, we've got 10x the amount of derivatives on the market than we have actual mortgages. And all of a sudden things fall apart. And so, yes, I think it's a very key conversation to have, is that these calls and these puts, like, it's very different to buying a share right now. When you're saying, I'm going to buy a share at a future date at a future price, or I'm going to sell a share at a future date at a future price, there's so much uncertainty in that period that you don't know how to account for. And what I found scary was that I was reading an article somewhere that said that the derivatives market is worth something like 1,000 times the value of the actual stock market, something crazy like that.
Oh, wow.
So people are leveraging themselves to the hilt and gambling on these financial moves back and forth that they have no control over. And when something like this happens, and all of a sudden, millions and millions of dollars are disappearing because of the short squeeze, then everyone calls for more regulation.
Yep.
So yeah, it's such a difficult one, Chad, because you want these instruments to be available to like sophisticated
Yeah.
investors, even on an individual level,
Yeah.
because they're part of wealth generation. It's part of the financial system. But at the same time, if you don't know what you're doing, this can get very dark very quickly.
Yeah, and I guess that's just a word of caution to everyone listening, or whether it's live or at a future time. It's certainly, I mean, it's really hard to be in this juncture where you're logging onto social media and someone who you follow has decided, they want to take a plunge and they invest some of their cash because, hey, they earned tons of money, and in that sort of cycle you get swept up to potentially want to do the same thing. But it's again another caution to everyone listening. Certainly on the GameStop stuff, that's over. It's probably done. I guess by now, Barry, it's on its way down, right?
It's not on its way down yet because we have some very, very passionate Redditors who are still holding the line. They still
Oh
want to go
wow.
to the moon. But we must caution that the crash is inevitable. The
Yep.
crash is inevitable, and it's going to be a hot potato situation. If you're left with a hot potato at the end, you're going to lose absolutely everything. So unfortunately, there are individual investors who are buying in now because they're excited by the hype and they're learning about stocks for the first time, and they've got some extra stimulus checks to kind of throw into this equation. But unfortunately, GameStop is not worth $400 a share.
Yep.
It just isn't. And when the crash happens, it's going to be this massive panic. Everyone tries to sell as quickly as they can as the price like decimates itself. And if you're going to be left with that hot potato right at the bottom, you're in big trouble. Especially if you're on an app like Robinhood,
Yep.
where you don't control the brokerage. If they pause it and you're not in that situation, unfortunately, all your money disappears. And so, yeah, I don't think you should be buying GameStop. I really don't think you should. I think it's interesting though to think about it as what it means for the future of our financial system. And as investors, and even as lay people, this opportunity and this kind of scenario that's just happened in this past week has changed everything.
Hmm.
It really has revolutionized how we think about the financial system. And it opens up so many interesting discussions about blockchain to come because a lot of the problems that we're seeing because of this week are solved by blockchain. And that's why I'm excited about this, obviously.
Of course, I can just see your eyes lighting up there. And I mean, I'm going to ask you to kind of explain how some of that stuff would be solvable. Obviously, not in crazy technical language. But before I do, I just want to ask Barry, in terms of what lies ahead for the rest of this year, the next couple of years, all that kind of stuff. Now that this group has decided or has kind of discovered this audience that they have, and they have been able to effectively, earmark one stock and make it go, make it go up crazy. I think a lot of people who have benefited positively have got their families out of financial trouble, etc., etc. So the question now is this all we're going to see in this type of news going forward, or do you think they tasted some bit of victory and potentially get carried away with this?
Chad, it's definitely the first of many because I think if you go into the subreddit, and I'd really recommend it, it's very enjoyable and very exciting to go and look at the subreddit.
Okay.
They have got a whole list of stocks and they've tried with 5 or 6 at the moment. So GameStop's the biggest one. It's the one that's in the news, but they've tried with a couple other ones, Bed Bath and Beyond, AMC movie theaters, a whole bunch of different
Yeah.
stocks that are heavily shorted. And the next one that sounds like on the horizons and on the WhatsApp groups that I'm on, sounds like they want to do the same thing they've done, but to silver, to the
Oh wow.
the current, not the currency, the commodity silver,
Yeah.
because they think that silver is very heavily shorted. And so I think we will see more of this in the future, in the year to come. What's interesting to see is whether hedge funds will take some of their foot off the gas.
Yep.
So will they bring some of those short positions down to try and avoid this happening in the future? And that's kind of the hope, is that some of their reckless behavior is kind of pulled back a little bit because they realize that, oh, hold on, if this Reddit discovers this short position that I have, they can very quickly put their millions of people on that stock or that commodity and drive that price way up. So first of many, but I wonder if we'll ever see this sort of impact because hedge funds I'm assuming, will try and fix their positions a little bit.
Yeah, this is fascinating. When you tell me about all of the WhatsApp groups, it kind of reminds me of the cryptocurrency fly up in the beginning, where you had all of these people who are overnight experts talking about, oh no, but Bitcoin's not the one. There's Ripple, and then there's a fork, and there's this and there's that, and I never got involved in the whole thing. But it certainly sounds like that kind of time and that kind of discussion.
It's exactly that, Chad. It's all the crypto groups that I'm in are talking about this. And it is pure gambling. I'm telling you, like, I do not get into one of these
Yeah,
groups and listen to these guys. They're just gambling. But it's exciting to watch the kind of conversations that they're having and the behind the scenes, what's actually going into a short squeeze like this. This takes a lot of coordination.
yeah,
You can't just pull this off with 10 of your mates around a dinner table. It takes millions of people buying the stock to actually make this happen. And that's what makes it so exciting. And there's so many parallels, like you said, to the crypto boom of years and years past. And that's why I just want to caution people that it's not about taking GameStop to the moon. It's much bigger than that. And I don't think you should be investing in these sorts of short squeezes. There's way too much risk here. But what it points to is that our financial system is potentially broken
yeah,
and potentially needs some fixing. Because if this is able to happen, a world economy could crash if this
yeah,
goes
yeah,
like to the moon. Literally, it really could crash. If hedge funds are going bankrupt and pension funds are going bankrupt and those sorts of things, you're in big trouble as a world economy. And so this is kind of pointed, this poked a hole in the financial system and said, cool. Are you resilient enough to put up with this little short squeeze? Because even though it's significant, it's
yeah,
still it's one share, it's one
yeah, yeah.
stock on the US market. Are you resilient enough as a system to manage this chaos? And that's the question we have to answer.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, you say that it can't be achieved with with just you and 10 of your mates around the table. I mean, Barry, what if Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates were my mates? I'm sure we could pull it off.
With that sort of money, sure, Chad. And I look forward to the day where you're sitting around a table with Bill and Jeff and Elon. I really look forward to that.
Hey, stranger things have happened. So let's quickly just return to where we were, Barry, and just talk about how crypto could have made this in a different scenario. So what is it about cryptocurrency, blockchain technology? I suppose it's blockchain more specifically than crypto. What does blockchain have that could fix this kind of stuff? I mean, is it more transparency? Would we have been able to see that there's a short position in the kind of extent that it was because of the public ledger? Is that the kind of fix here, or is there something else happening behind the scene?
The transparency is not as important in this case because I think regulation shows that for certain short positions you have to
Right.
disclose that. So that was public information.
Okay.
Where blockchain really plays a role here is in decentralization, right? The whole idea of blockchain is that nobody owns it. Nobody owns the ability to trade. No one owns the ability to kind of make the market whatever they want. And the current financial system that we have is essentially a centralized system
Right.
because the hedge funds and the big financial institutions have such a monopoly over the market that they can do whatever they want. They can change regulation. They can arbitrarily push prices up and down because they've got such huge volumes behind them
Yeah.
that they're able to kind of collude and do what they need to do. In a blockchain situation, they wouldn't be able to collude in the way that they do because there is so much more decentralization. And ideally, for example, you wouldn't be able to short 140% of the shares because those shares each will be a piece of the blockchain. And once you've reached
Right.
100%, there's no more
That's it.
shares to short, right? Whereas at the moment, because they are playing their own game behind this walled garden, they can do all these weird and wonderful derivatives that don't actually have a tie in reality. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that blockchain allows what's called smart contracts, which are contracts that can execute automatically based on certain triggers.
Ah,
So instead of relying on Robinhood or one of these interfaces to go and like do your brokerage for you, and then all of a sudden they phone you and say, "Oh, we're closed today. Sorry, we can't execute your contract." Instead of that situation, you can say with absolute certainty that when this price hits a certain thing, I want to sell my contract, I
right.
want to sell my put, my call, whatever. So that's the second piece of this, and that's what makes this a decentralized network, is that there is no one company or a hedge fund or a Robinhood who has control over your finances or over your shares or whatever. It's completely in the hands of each individual investor. Now, of course, that brings up a lot of questions about are people sophisticated enough
Yeah.
to understand that? And we've seen lots of stories of people losing their Bitcoin passwords and losing millions of dollars in Bitcoin because they lost their password,
Yeah.
right? Whereas when you have a broker, that isn't a concern. So there are downsides to it, But a lot of the problems that have been raised in the situation conveniently have Bitcoin solutions or blockchain solutions, at least. And so there's a lot of discussion now about, is this the time? Is this the time where we see blockchain start to find its first real use case? Because up until now, it's purely been speculation.
Yep.
People are playing with it because it's exciting and it's new technology and it's got all this potential. This could be the very first use case that actually comes into effect. And I don't know if that's next year, in 10 years, in 50 years' time. I don't know when it is, but it's a sign of light for the blockchain community that it's more than just a currency. It could become the heartbeat of a decentralized financial system that doesn't allow hedge funds to control it in the way they do currently.
I love it. And I love the passion with which you speak about it. I mean, everyone watching, like, look at Barry. He's in his absolute element. No, thanks for kind of explaining that. That really does help quite a lot. So now that we are all clued up about derivatives, about the financial markets, about blockchain, we certainly didn't start this one on a light note, did we? We can now move on to the next thing that is a little bit complex, and that is talking about vaccines. We've seen a whole bunch of news this week, obviously about new vaccines, and we're not going to go into that specifically today. But what I do want to talk about is this dynamic between the UK and the EU. Obviously, Brexit happened in 2020, and for all of the years that we had been speaking about it, kind of preempting things that could possibly happen, loads of speculation. I mean, obviously never thought it was going to actually physically happen because of how long it was dragging on. It actually did happen. Yeah. And what we've now seen since then is potentially some of the benefits for the UK, because they have been able to, they secured a contract with AstraZeneca and I suppose a load of the other vaccine manufacturers way before the EU did. And so because of that, the UK is now sitting in a great position, in a favorable position in terms of having access to a whole bunch of different vaccines. And what you're seeing now is I mean, some people say the UK is about 12 weeks ahead of the EU in terms of vaccine supply, which is pretty significant. What you're seeing now is cases going absolutely crazy in Portugal and Spain. Funny enough, France doesn't look too bad at this point in time. But what you're seeing is obviously the UK variant transmitting its way through Europe. And ultimately, these countries you're struggling to contain it, and obviously looking towards the horizon for the way out of this, which is vaccines. And ultimately, we've seen quite a lot of back and forth this week in terms of vaccines, and more specifically, the ability to export vaccines from the EU. And I mean, I'm going to focus particularly on AstraZeneca because I think this was the most fascinating this week, where essentially we saw the CEO making a couple of allegations about contracts that were held with the EU. And on the back of that, the commission in the EU actually just went out and published the contract. They said, this is what you say. Well, here's the actual contract. And it's crazy, sort of uncharted territory, to be completely honest. And certainly having a deal so that's so recent. It's just happened. To now be looking through all of those conditions and clauses, just a few months, not even a few months, just within 1 month, kind of after signing that deal, looking through with a fine tooth comb all the various clauses and making sure that you're kind of within line. It's been really quite interesting, Barry. And I suppose when lives are on the line, as we always know has been the case with the COVID crisis, now we're at the kind of peak of this battle. Vaccines are the most important thing. Obviously, we're going to see quite a bit of tension and activity around negotiations, supply, and just, I suppose, safeguarding the best of society in each particular country.
It's very easy before the vaccines are here to talk about, okay, we're going to distribute this equally. We're going to make sure everyone across the world has them. We're going to do the best we can to get the right categories going and whatnot. The moment the vaccines are here, like you say, and people are dying every single day, the stakes are so much higher that all of that gets thrown out the window and everyone is looking after themselves. I mean, America have been vaccinating millions of people. The UK have been vaccinating millions of people. And here in South Africa, we don't even have a sniff of a vaccine yet, right? And so it's a great example of when the stakes are high and urgency is required, all of a sudden becomes a dog-eat-dog world. and everyone's looking after themselves. And that's why it's so interesting to publish a contract like that and actually like give real
Yeah.
transparency to what's actually happening behind the scenes. And it reminds you that Brexit has real implications. It really, really does impact the lives of ordinary Europeans and ordinary like British people, right? And so that huge decision that took years and years to unravel is now showing itself that okay, there are real
Yeah.
consequences here. And obviously, there's lots of nuance and lots of discussions as to who is in the right and what the right way to do this is. But unfortunately, we still live in a world where the nation state is paramount, and people are going to look after their own citizens first and want to make sure that that is the case before they think about giving elsewhere or exporting, for example. So yeah, it's a tricky one because humanity is almost fighting against itself in a way, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, you're completely right. And I mean, just to talk about the importance of Brexit and being able to have the European Union order on behalf of their member states, what we did see, and I actually watched an interview with Tony Blair as well, and he actually said that we could have under the European Union made our own plans in terms of vaccines as well. And it's actually something that Germany's done. So Germany's actually gone out and signed their own contracts, which is certainly fascinating to look at. And it does kind of, like you say, question whether this union is actually working in the best way when their members have to go kind of above it and expedite their own contracts. So that certainly is pretty fascinating. So I guess in terms of this the core issue here, Barry, is that you've got factories for the AstraZeneca which is the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. You've got factories manufacturing this in the EU. I think there's 2 factories. And of course, you also have one in the UK. Now, I believe the UK have sort of 100 million doses that were kind of pre-ordered. Of course, this vaccine, Oxford University was core in coming up with this vaccine in the first place. So before we look at where it's being manufactured, you obviously have to look at where the research came from, just the underlyings of the vaccine. And of course, because of that and because of that partnership, the UK were able to safeguard kind of 100 million doses before anyone else. And I suppose the important thing here is that you've got people producing it in the UK and you've also got people producing it in the EU. Now, the question is why the EU factories are kind of shipping stuff across to the UK. And I suppose one of the potential answers at this point in time is that the EU's actually been pretty slow at authorizing vaccines, approving them for use. And so that's the next key question here is the countries who are able to get that approval and start the actual rollouts as soon as possible are of course going to be the biggest priority, because there's no point in a vaccine just sitting in a lab where you can actually get it into people's arms.
Exactly. And that's the bureaucracy that really becomes a key part of this discussion. We chatted a lot about logistics in the build up to
Yep.
this vaccine. And that's exactly what it means is that if you're not able to be agile enough to adjust to changing circumstances and get those shots into people's arms, and you kind of mire it in paperwork or bureaucracy or whatever needs to be done in order to regulate and approve these things, then unfortunately you're not going to be able to pull it off. And
Yep.
like you say, the factory just wants to get those things out and into people's arms and stuff, right? So it is one of those examples of an EU type situation where the bureaucracy is quite legit and quite
Yep.
serious, and it's often much easier as a one nation state to go and get the job done because you can act a little bit quicker than a much bigger organization that has so many more considerations to make. It's very similar to the discussion between big companies, which are quite stodgy and don't really want to change, versus startups, which are able to really move quickly and
Yep.
act decisively. It's a very similar thing. One country on its own, Germany, can go and get those vaccines that it needs without needing to go through all of the considerations that a big EU needs to go through in order to please all the various stakeholders. And so it's a very interesting discussion as to what is the right configuration of this and how do you get these things as quickly as possible without wasting time and wasting opportunities where these vaccines are sitting on a shelf.
100%. And it's not an easy one, especially because as this time is taken, we've got variants that, who knows, Barry, a new variant could be busy out in the wild happening right now. So the longer you take to actually get these things into people's arms, the more risk you have of this just becoming worse and worse and worse. One other little bit that I wanted to highlight while we were here just talking about this, Barry, is in terms of that Brexit deal, what we actually saw this past week, and this is fascinating for me, is that we actually saw the EU breaking the deal temporarily. So they invoked what they call Article 16, which essentially stops exports to Northern Ireland. And I mean, I don't understand the full ramifications of this, but it's a pretty big deal. Obviously, Northern Ireland has been a key part of this topic since the beginning. Obviously, you have an island in the middle of the ocean, which is split into two, and the bottom part falls within the EU, the top part falls within the UK, and so obviously, without having an actual physical border there to stop what's going in and out, this is one of the key bits that this deal has been centered around. And to see something like this happen, and was actually quickly withdrawn afterwards, I suppose for very good reason. But it certainly is, I think, quite worrying to see this so quickly after reaching this deal.
That's the thing. I mean, I remember us chatting about it, Chad, and it really was a big sticking point for months and months and months. And it was the cause of a lot of negotiation and lots of difficult conversations. And everyone knew that this was going to come. That at some point, this little anomaly was going to be tested. And who would have thought that a couple of weeks after the Brexit deal is actually approved and gone through, it comes to bite us, right? And so, yeah, it really is a tricky situation. And it's such an interesting one from a historical perspective, because the reason that Ireland is split is because of very interesting kind of religious fights in the past and all these sorts of these very much, we don't know if we want to belong with you and we feel very different to you. But all of a sudden, a global vaccine, a global pandemic requires us to stand together as one. And like you say, revoke things where necessary, move the rules, bend things where possible. It's a reminder to all of us that all of these divisions and these kind of these barriers we put between us and other human beings have ramifications. And when we need each other, all of a sudden you've got to break these walls down. And that's not as easy as once thought.
No, definitely isn't. And I guess this is why you kind of try and get all stakeholders involved when you think about these deals. But hopefully, once you put the wet ink on that dotted line, you'd certainly hope that all parties are going to be sticking to what it is that they've agreed upon. So let's hope that never happens again. I certainly don't think this is the end of the story, Barry. The other question, of course, is about developing nations. So, like you say, South Africa in a bit of trouble, it seems. Obviously, you've got the COVAX alliance and all of that kind of stuff. It's certainly worth mentioning that the UK and certainly the US have over-ordered vaccines. There is no way that if every single one of these vaccines is an actual thing and gets approved for use and all that kind of stuff, that both of those countries are going to be able to use those vaccines for themselves. So I'm sure at some point in time, hopefully we would see some rejigging of these vaccines to the developing world too.
I hope so. And I think I was a little bit exaggerating when I said we haven't had a sniff. I do think we have some vaccines coming in the next couple of weeks, but it's a very small order and it's just for our healthcare workers to try and get the guys on the front line. But I think that the actual mass order of all of the vaccines is still a couple of months away for us. And I think it speaks to a lack of resources on South Africa's part. We just don't have the money to be able to bid in a lot of these bidding wars for the first part. And the second part is like, we just aren't in those conversations enough. I don't know how much bargaining power South Africa or an emerging market has when it comes to an Oxford vaccine or when it comes to one of these big vaccines in the first world. And like we were chatting about earlier, everyone wants to look after themselves first. It would be a really tough political move to kind of start sending vaccines across your borders if you've still got people in your country who haven't got it, right? It's a very, very difficult political move to pull off. And so developing markets, they desperately need these vaccines, like you say. But unfortunately, that's the way the world works, is that where the money is, that's what's going to dominate these discussions. And so once the US and the UK have vaccinated their whole population, then we'll see the PR spin, and then they'll become these aiders, and they'll become these kind of saviors of the world, but only after they've saved themselves first.
100%. Your own life mask before helping others, right? It's such a great analogy that I use in so many areas of life, but it's true. It is true. You've got to kind of keep your own house in order and get yourself sorted first. Barry, shall we move on then to our next segment?
Let's look ahead.
Stuff I found interesting.
Oh, the live got me, Chad. I said the wrong thing. The live got me. We're looking at stuff we found interesting. Looking ahead is not just yet. One of the joys of live stream on YouTube is you get to see those bloopers in real time. So enjoy that wherever you're listening right now. But the only thing I wanted to chat about in this segment, Chad, is a very short one. We chatted about blockchain in the previous segments, and there was a very interesting development. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world at the moment, he loves a good controversy. He loves to stir up the pot. He loves to tweet all these ridiculous things. And he decided that in the middle of this GameStop to the moon talk, he was going to change his Twitter bio. And the only word in that Twitter bio is Bitcoin. That's his bio.
Wow.
And what was funny to see was that the moment that he made that bio, it trended across Twitter, and Bitcoin added, I think, $20 billion worth of market cap within a couple of minutes, which is absolutely insane. This man is so powerful. The moment he tweets something, he can change the world.
It's ridiculous. It's crazy. I mean, I know we've spoken before about him putting a tweet out saying, I think the Tesla share price is overvalued, in my opinion, or something like that. Yeah, certainly quite the reckless tweeter. I mean, Trump is certainly not alone. But this is really interesting to me, Barry, because of the fact that it's his bio. I mean, to be taken to his bio, you have to be actively looking at his profile page. And I mean, to actually even trigger a trending by changing your bio, this sparks me as something pretty interesting. He didn't even put out a tweet.
No, but the thing is, Chad, is once one person sees it, they do the good old screenshot.
Yeah.
They take that drawing tool and they circle the Bitcoin, and then they tweet that. And those are the screenshots that were generating all of the buzz. And so I think we forget that Elon Musk has got this crazy fanatical fan base, myself included, who will literally follow every second of his life because he's such a powerful and influential figure. And so just changing the bio can cause a ripple throughout Twitter that really did change the whole thing. And so for those who are invested in Bitcoin, you made a lot of money in a very short space of time, but it's more about the endorsement, almost the implicit endorsement that he's giving to the platform. And I can't help but wonder, Chad, is there a Elon Musk Bitcoin / blockchain company in the future? We know that he loves to jump on all of these things. He's got 6 companies under his wings at the moment. Are we going to see a decentralized finance company coming from him in the future? And the reason it's so interesting is because if you remember, he was one of the very first founders of PayPal. That's where he got his start, is that he was one of the founding team of PayPal. So he understands finance. He understands fintech. That's where he was born. That's where his first success was.
Yep.
I wouldn't be surprised to see something coming from him in the future, some sort of blockchain related company. And that's going to be a very interesting kind of value adding status symbol for the whole blockchain community to say, cool, we've got this guy on our team.
Yeah, that would be fascinating. I mean, the question there is, why did he not put blockchain as just blockchain rather than Bitcoin? I mean, that is, like you say, quite the endorsement, to be coming from the Elon Musk. And I wouldn't be surprised, like you say, I wouldn't be surprised if he's got something of his own in the works. It would make sense. The question for me is, if that were to happen, what are you going to do, Barry?
Oh, I don't know, Chad. I don't know. It's very hard to bet against Elon Musk. All of his ideas have sounded crazy at the time. Who would have thought, I'm going to start a rocket company and I'm not going to throw the rockets away. I'm going to land them again back on the earth and reuse them. Absolute insanity. Who would have thought I'm going to go away from all of these sports cars and all of these kind of petrol built cars? I'm going to build this amazing electric vehicle that is sexier, that is more high performance, that is faster than all of these cars. All of his ideas sound crazy at the time, but if you look at the results, you look at the track record, it's hard to bet against him. So I don't know. I wouldn't want to bet against him, Chad. He's Elon Musk after all. But at the moment, it feels more like a meme than a serious consideration for him. But that's what happened with the Boring Company when he was deciding, cool, I'm going to dig tunnels under LA. It was all a meme. And he loves that sort of thing. So who knows? I don't know. I'll have to wait and see.
But then again, he was very much in support of Kanye West's presidential candidate to run. And we know what happened with that, Barry.
Meme, Dad. For the meme. Surely that's for the meme. I think that he's an expert troller. And that's why I think that this Bitcoin thing has made everyone's days. It certainly was very funny from my perspective. So I hear you, but I think that it was more for the meme and the fact that he was being a few photos with Kanye West. I mean, why not?
Why not? Definitely. Well, that's all on that front. Let's now look at ourselves. Barry, I know you've been excited for this. Let's develop and grow.
Develop and grow.
So, Chad, I want to lay my heart out on the line. I want to get some advice from Mr. Chad Sturley and whoever's listening or
Ooh,
watching at this point. And I've been struggling in the last couple of days. I've been working my butt off. And I think
okay.
everyone who's working from home at the moment can feel that almost that droning monotony of sitting in that same chair by yourself or at your desk, whatever the story is,
Yeah.
working for hour, an hour, an hour. And when you don't have excuses, you don't have a social life to go to, you don't have other stuff going on, you never really get that break from the work in the same way that when you're in an office, you can go and get a coffee or go and stand around the water cooler or
Mm, yeah.
go and get go to a restaurant and go get some dinner. Or when you leave the office, you can like legitimately leave the office and kind of not be available. In today's world, we have to kind of be available all the time. And when there's nothing else to do, it feels like you can work all the time. And the problem is, Chad, I've been working all the time and it's getting a bit much. And so I wanted to ask you, like, how do we think about switching off when we're working from home? How do we think about, cool, we're going to set a time, close that laptop, and not look at emails for the rest of the night? Because I'm really struggling with that, and I'm trying to find ways to tactics to kind of change my day a little bit so that I have a shutdown time, so that I
Yeah.
don't work all the time. What do you think?
I think you've answered the question yourself. And to be honest, it was how I was going to answer it in any case. But then you said it yourself. So I was like, well, there we go. Barry's just done it for me. But it's closing the laptop. So the challenge that you have is that the laptop that you spend your personal time on and the laptop that you work on is one and the same. Whereas in my case, I've got one that's been sent through by my company, and then I've got my MacBook Pro, which is what I'm using right now. So when I've decided, okay, it's time to shut off, the work laptop literally gets closed and it gets put away in a drawer. I can't see it. I have to physically think about pulling the drawer out to take it up and set myself up to work again. And you know, once that happens, the natural progression is to my personal laptop, which means that I will only be doing personal stuff. In your case, because that laptop is one and the same, the little tip or hack or trick or whatever that I would give is to set up a second user profile on that laptop. So have one that is work. You can call it your company's name. I don't know if you've decided to unleash the name to the rest of the world yet, and you can if you'd like. But have a profile that is for that company. Obviously, you have all your documents and you have all your logins and everything's circulating over there. And then for your personal one, you've got your personal profile. So I think that could work potentially. It might still be a little bit too easy to click switch user and start working again. But I mean, that's how I would do it, Barry.
That makes a lot of sense. I think I must think more about that kind of separation. I
Mm,
think one of the most powerful things in environments and creating productive environments is having dedicated spaces for certain things. And that's why an office works so well. Because when you leave the office, you physically do leave and your
yeah, yeah,
mind's
yeah.
like, cool, I can now switch off. Whereas when you're in the same space, it's almost like creating that digital separation rather than a physical separation, which I think is what you're getting at. But the second piece, and like you said, that the problem I solve for myself in real time is setting a time that I'm going to
Yeah,
stop
yeah,
and giving myself actual working hours. When you're working for yourself, it's very easy to kind of make your schedule whatever you want because the flexibility is infinite. You can do whatever you'd like. There's no boss over your shoulder. There's no Teams invites. There's no kind of
yeah.
instant messaging from your teammates. And so it's very easy to have a very all over the place schedule. It's one of the best parts of working for yourself, but it can be a bit much sometimes. And
Mm.
so I wonder if I need to be setting myself a starting time and an end time, and then having the discipline to when that end time is up, then moving on to other stuff. And that's what I need to work on, I think.
The weird and like almost funny in a way, part that this brings to the discussion is a lot of people escape the 9 to 5 for flexibility. But then when you escape the 9 to 5, what you realize is actually there might be something in that 9 to 5 idea, and kind of start working your way back again. I mean, certainly when the world returns to normal, Barry, I mean, I know you can socialize at the moment with friends in limited numbers and that kind of thing. But certainly when the world returns to normal again, I'm sure you're going to closer align yourself to that 9 to 5 purely for a social aspect, so that when you do want to socialize, your friends are available. Because not all your friends are freelancers, and I bet not all of them would be able to go for coffee at 10 o'clock in the morning.
It's exactly that. And it's so funny because I could write a book on this stuff about how all the glamour of this freelancing,
Mm.
self-employed entrepreneur lifestyle, you don't see the realities behind it. Yes,
Yep.
it's great to have flexibility, but that routine is actually super powerful.
Mm.
And if you don't get that right, you can waste your days away, which I've done multiple times in the past, because you just have too much flexibility and you actually want some routine and some structure in your days. And so yeah, there's lots to learn there. I've learned a lot about myself in this whole process as to
Yeah.
how to like work most productively when you don't have someone forcing you, when you don't have deadlines, or you don't have kind of this external pressure. It all has to come from you. And that's a lot of pressure sometimes. And so yeah, I think you're right. I think that the 9 to 5 is this meme that we want to escape, because it's this idea that it's going to be much better on the other side. The grass is going to be greener. We're going to sit on our beach in Bermuda and work on our laptops and
Yep.
all that stuff. It looks great on Instagram. The truth of the matter is it's way more complicated than that.
It most certainly is. Well, Barry, we've done our first live stream, and I mean, if I look at the timer, great timing. We kind of 1 hour and 1 minute. We've really timed this one perfectly. We've had one viewer, which is quite something. But I guess we have to kind of preface it with, this was our first live stream. We wanted to test this thing out, really. I don't even think we went into all the options to see if we can notify our subscribers or anything like that. So I bet there'll be more to come on that front. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, what we're going to be doing is getting a bit of a schedule together, and you will be able to watch with us in real time in the future, and be able to comment, and we can have a bit of a hangout going, which I think is really quite cool. And potentially, Barry, we can even do some ad hoc live streams as well that might not make it to the regular podcast. We'll certainly see where this takes us. But from what you've seen so far, is this live stream thing a thing?
I think it is, Chad. I've been so surprised by how easy it's been and how smooth it's been. I think we haven't had as many problems as we've had in the past when it comes to speaking, and maybe it's that extra pressure to know that there is no editing. This is exactly how it's coming out of our mouths. But we're looking forward to seeing what it looks like in the post, and we'd love to hear from you. If you're listening to this or you're watching this post the live, please let us know what you think. This is an interesting new direction for us, and like you said, it might give us the freedom to make different sorts of content and make new sorts of things. And we're always looking to evolve here at Across the Pond. We're always trying to get better and better. And so this has been quite a successful experiment from my perspective, Chad. So. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I completely think so. I thought I'd be fumbling on my words 10 minutes. I mean, there were a couple, but the thing is, you force yourself to recover. Whereas if you were the fly on the wall watching us record our episodes in the old days being literally from last week, I mean, just editing those bloopers together, Barry, it takes long.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. And it's one of those things where the moment you've got some more stakes, maybe you perform a bit better, because you don't have that backup plan in your mind. You don't have the plan B. It's plan A or nothing else. And so it's really going to test our skills, but hopefully deliver a more relevant, more timely product for you guys, so that you're not hearing about GameStop a week after all the chaos. You're hearing about it as it's happening.
Exactly. And it also opens up so many options for us for guests, which I know we want to definitely do this year in a big way. I've talking about going to the moon. I've got the moon ambitions, Barry, with all the guests that we can be having, and it's really quite cool because they're able to actually watch what's happening on the screen at the very same time, and it's all sleek and it all works really quite well. So that is indeed quite exciting. Well, if you made it all this way, thank you so much for watching or listening. We really do appreciate you, and we hope to see you next week when we're back with another episode of Across the Pond. Across the